There we go. So, hello everyone. My name is Julia Davis of Yoga Teachers Forum, and I am today I'm here with Fiona Agombar, the author of, got my little book here, Yoga Therapy for Stress, Burnout, and Chronic Fatigue Syndrome. But we're here today to talk much more broadly about Fiona's life and work in yoga, because she is going to be running a couple of events with Yoga Teachers Forum. There's a workshop coming up in the end of September, the 24th of September, and 75% of the profits of that are going to the amazing charity Tree Sisters. So you'll hear a little bit more about that later. And she also runs a 4-week online training course where lots of the content is online, but Fiona's kind of there throughout, and the question and answers that come up throughout that 4-week period are really fascinating. And it's wonderful to see all the questions that emerge from the various people who get involved with that. And that's going to be beginning in November. But before we talk about any of that, welcome, Fiona.
Thank you, Julia. It's really kind of you to ask me to do this.
Very welcome. No, there's no need to be nervous, because anything that I ask you is going to be about your long career working in this area. And what I'd love to do is really go back to the beginning, because there's you have a real passion for supporting people who have experiences of chronic fatigue. And that has come from somewhere in particular. And I would really love to know where that originated.
Well, I had ME myself for 15 years. And in the late 1980s, I was running a busy public relations business, and I never took breaks. I think my story is quite typical, actually. I was very driven. I was a perfectionist. And it was kind of in that era where you were meant to be working hard and you were really valued for what you produced rather than who you were. It was the kind of Thatcher era of, you can have it all. And I got what I thought was flu. It turned out to be glandular fever. And I went back to work after a couple of weeks, and I was completely exhausted. But again, it was the culture was, even if you're exhausted, you take a Lemsip and you push through. And eventually I just got so bone exhausted, I had to stop. And I ended up selling my part of the business, but even that to get as far as that was very stressful. And then eventually went with my husband at the time to the doctor, and she took some blood tests and she said, well, you've had glandular fever, maybe you need to go and rest a bit. But she didn't really emphasize how much I needed to rest. So as soon as I had a little bit of energy, I was up pushing myself again, trying to do more. And the culture of that time, and this has only changed recently, I think, was very much that if you're tired, you should try and exercise your way out of it, and you should actually push yourself more. So this went on probably for a year or two. And long story short, I ended up in a wheelchair. I ended up completely debilitated. And eventually I went into a psychiatric hospital, not because I had a psychiatric illness, but at the time I still had my private medical insurance, and the Priory at the time said that they could deal with chronic fatigue, although of course chronic fatigue wasn't really talked about very much at that time. So I went in as an inpatient for 3 months. I was put on a horrible antidepressant, which didn't make much difference. But it did get me very addicted to antidepressants, because that's another story. Trying to get off that drug years later became very tricky. I met a physiotherapist who talked about this being learned helplessness, and I needed to do graded activity. So that was kind of, again, the culture of the time. So eventually I came home. I was very ill for years. And then, without it sounding cliched, one day when I was well enough to go into my local town, which wasn't very often, I met this wonderful yoga teacher called Angela Stevens. And she said, oh, I've heard of a few people like yourself, and I'm going to set up a remedial kind of yoga therapy group. There'll be about 4 or 5 of you. Would you be interested? And I knew nothing about yoga at that time. So this is about 1993. So I said, yes, I'll give anything a go. And then when I went to Angela's and I met other people who had the same condition as me, which was a great relief, that Angela talked about the need to rest, this, the importance of shavasana or deep relaxation. And she talked about the importance of the mind being quiet. And I can honestly say for me then, these were completely new concepts, the idea that you should have a quiet mind, although my mind was so hectic, or the idea that you should rest and stop and actually have deep relaxation were very, very radical to me at that time. But, from that, I got into yoga, and then I started to go away to a yoga center, which is sadly closed down now. And, it took years, but I would put the yoga lifestyle really down to my recovery. So much so that in 1999, I wrote a book called Beat Fatigue with Yoga, because I wanted other people to be helped with this. And then eventually my marriage was quite abusive. My husband was an alcoholic. I eventually came off the antidepressants. And then I realized that, I needed to get out of the marriage. And I think without yoga, I wouldn't have had the opportunity to be in touch with myself, to make that connection with myself, and to have the kind of compassion for myself. So when I finally left him in 2004, I actually then made a complete recovery. So yeah, that's kind of in a nutshell.
Wow.
Into yoga.
That is
your question was, why am I so passionate? Because I know the hell of having an illness in a society which doesn't respect fatigue, in which you are exhausted all the time. And I just really want to do anything I can. And I do feel I'm also feel my eyes watering now. I really do feel passionate about helping other people with whatever I can. But when I say helping, it's about helping people to help themselves, of course. So it's very much a journey of self-empowerment.
Yeah. Wow. It is really emotional to hear you talk in that way. I've actually, I've spoken to you a number of times, over the last few months, and I know your story to some extent, but to hear you talk about it in that way it really is emotional, because as much as there is more knowledge out there about the need to rest and self-care, we still very much live in a world which is about doing. And it's almost when we don't feel okay, it's like, what should I do about it? Should I do my this and do my that? And to undo is still very much not recognized. And there's a very big difference between doing a nod to the head to the need to relax and actually creating space for healing to occur. So it's really, lovely for you to hear you talk about that need to rest and how that's come from yoga as well, and how yoga was a pathway to coming to that space of feeling, in entire recovery. I'd love to kind of focus on one aspect of that. So you talked about the group that you were part of, and that being part of a group made you feel different to being somebody on their own going through that. And I know that you run groups for people who, have experienced what you experienced. Now, I'd just love you maybe to talk a little bit more about that feeling of being with other people and practicing yoga with those people, and what that might have looked like and might look like now.
When I had ME, we didn't have the internet. So the first few years I had it, I didn't actually know anyone else who had this condition. And that was incredibly isolating. And of course, at that time, there's also this culture of you're lazy or you're malingering, or I remember one doctor in the Telegraph said that we were all monomaniacs. So it was a great relief when I could start to meet other people. Having said this, and I think I'm suspecting that people watching this, some of the people watching this might have ME or long COVID themselves. Am I right? Yeah. Hi, I thought so. So you'll probably relate. And later on, perhaps we can get you to join in as well. But I think that when you have groups, when you meet people, it has to be a balance. Because when I get people together, I always try and keep it very positive and upbeat and more about health. Because when you get a group of people with ME together, it can go downwards where everybody is complaining about their symptoms, which are difficult, and we do need support sometimes. And I'm not saying that we don't, but, I think we also have to focus on health and how we can heal without getting obsessed with trying to fix everything. Because, you were also saying that we live in this society where we have to be doing all the time. And one of the other problems with this condition is we feel we've got to be running around looking for a cure as well. And that in itself can be exhausting. And there is some value in just staying still and accepting the current situation. But what I used to do before COVID was I would take people away on retreats and get people together. And that formed great friendships and great bonds. And I did that for a number of years. And then, of course, COVID struck. So now I teach on Zoom. So I try as much as I can to foster that feeling of us coming together. And I have a Facebook group where people can chat. And I know there's a couple of people here who come to my classes. I know Sammy, I don't know if you want to say anything about your experience, because I do, we do try and, don't we, to make the group. Can I ask you, Sammy, to unmute yourself and just say something about whether you feel the Zoom things have worked as a group to get us cohesive and together?
Yes, definitely, because the whole sort of, I have fatigue and the whole anxiety of the COVID, it was good to have that, you could just be at home and have that class and community feel that during this time. So it's been really helpful.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Sammy.
You're welcome.
So I mean, Sammy's also touching on something that I know that, because obviously I'm going through what we're all going through together. So I know that there's a lot of anxiety and a lot of fear around. So quite a lot of my classes, on my online ME fatigue classes recently, have been focusing on how we deal with fear and how we deal with anxiety. So I think as a group, that kind of is helpful, because we know that we're not just the only one that might be afraid, that this is a shared experience. And I mean, I think there's also, I've mentioned this before to you, Julia, and I'm not wanting to go down that line, but quite a few people with ME, including myself, I've got Lyme now, because what I didn't say at the end of my story is 7 years later, I got bitten by a tick. So I now have fatigue again, but I manage it really well with yoga. But because of that, quite a few of my students and myself also have not been vaccinated, because some of the reactions for people with ME are very severe to vaccination, because people feel more vulnerable. So yes, I do try and bring everyone. I don't ever really discuss the vaccination with the groups because it's very controversial, but I am aware that there's fear out there. So that's an example of how I try to keep us together as a group to find yoga tools that help to overcome that kind of day-to-day anxiety. I'm not sure that really answered your question, but
that's it's a lovely way of explaining that the group and the idea of being together as a group. I'd love also just to dial back, because you kind of talked about your initial teacher and how that revolutionized your experience because of the being given kind of permission to rest. And then you kind of jump forward to having written a book about how to support people with ME through yoga. That's a big jump to go from I attended my first class to I wrote my book. And what I'd love to do is maybe fill in the gaps a little bit and find out how you went from attending your first yoga class to teaching yoga and then writing a book specifically for a group that wasn't even recognized. I mean, I know there are people around today who are saying that long COVID isn't, that are doing the same to, I think they call it gaslighting now. They're gaslighting people who have long COVID in the same way as they did with people who have chronic fatigue. but I'd love to know how you went from attending your first class to being like a trailblazer for something that people could, I hate the word do now, but something that that addressed the need for a community that was basically being gaslighted by a large number of people within the medical profession, because that's, it's such a wonderful thing that glimmer of hope was given to these people, and how you made that transition would be really interesting to hear about.
Well, I think first of all, answer the question about the gaslighting, because that's still something that happens today for all of us. And it's still something that galvanizes me. And I like to say, as a yoga teacher, we are powered by love, not fear or anger. But I do really feel for the people I work with, and I know everybody has, if somebody has chronic fatigue, everybody has their story of how they have been gaslighted and marginalized with this illness. So yes, that has kind of galvanized me. But what happened, my actual kind of filling in the gap story, was that I then started working for the charity Action for ME. And that was largely because I had this background in PR. So I was asked if I would go on to advise on PR. So I eventually became a trustee for Action for ME. And I also used to write for their magazine. And I can't remember the name of Action for ME's magazine, but anyway, I used to contribute. And one of the first features I wrote was an article on ME and yoga. And that was so well appreciated, and the feedback from that was so great. And then there was a friend of mine who was a journalist, and she said, why don't you turn this into a book? And it kind of stuck in my mind that, this is really an important message. I would really like to share this. And somehow, I don't know how, it's difficult to get published, but somehow I had some contacts, and I qualified as a teacher at this point, but I was commissioned by, I spent a year researching that, when my energy allowed. I had a really lovely editor, Grace Cheetham. And at the end of the year, I produced the book, Beat Fatigue with Yoga, but also that caused me to go deep and really research lots of aspects of yoga in much more detail. So the book came first, ironically, and then I thought, well, I would like to train to be a teacher. But again, there was this problem still that I had ME, how would I do it? But the Yoga for Health Foundation, which is where I used to go, which, as I say, sadly closed down, and they used to run lots of weeks for people with MS, for people with Parkinson's. So they did lots of people with chronic illness. They put lots of weeks on for people like that. So they said, it's fine, you can train with us. And the training at the time was just over a period of, I think it was 4 weekends and some essays. So it wasn't a hugely substantial training, but I have to say the Yoga for Health Foundation really came from the heart. They were really, really heart-centered. And it was a good way for me to start. So I did their training, I think it was 2001. And then, I just set up some local classes because I had the energy to do an hour a week. But then when I recovered from ME, which is kind of 2004 onwards, I then started to run retreats for people with ME. People had heard of me because of the book, Beat Fatigue with Yoga, so they were coming back to me, and I was running the retreats. And then I felt I ought to develop my own training. So I then did the Krishnamacharya training, which under kind of, he was alive at the time, TKV Desikachar and his son Kaustubh. I did the training in the UK with Sarah Ryan and Jill Lloyd. And I'm still in that tradition because it's very yoga therapy based. So that was kind of how I then carried on. And then, as you know, I then felt that there was the need to write another book because the book I'd written in 1997 was a bit dated, and I'd learned so much more. And of course, we know so much more about fatigue now. So I then spent about 8 years from around 2012 researching to write my new book, which is Yoga Therapy for Stress, Burnout and Chronic Fatigue Syndrome. So that's got a lot more detail in it.
So that's quite a progression. It's so interesting that you kind of wrote the book and then felt drawn to do the training. And actually, that really speaks to something that I believe, because training is amazing. I mean, we run the Yoga Teachers Forum in order to make sure that people have knowledge and content and can really help people through learning and being with other people who are learning too. However, if you don't have the kind of passion, heartfelt commitment, and sometimes it really helps to have experience of something that you want to help people with, and the fact that you experienced ME, and then through that experience you had to practice it. It's like, you had to experience what yoga could give to you in order to experience your recovery, and that is really powerful to share with others. And it's almost like, I remember when I was postnatal, I just gathered together my postnatal mums with me and practiced yoga with them, because I just knew that was something that was benefiting me. Or Jenny, she had this passion to work with people who experienced cancer, and then from that came the teaching the yoga. So if you kind of have that, then starting to do something or create something with other people who need it, and then taking it forward from there, can be a really powerful place to start. So it's lovely to hear your story of it almost kind of starting backwards. As it were.
I think, because what I have discovered is that there are many people. The estimates are 250,000 people with ME in UK, but the estimate for long COVID, which is very, very similar, it's a post-viral condition, is maybe up to 1 million people, which is incredible. So we desperately need yoga teachers out there. And I know that there are lots of other people like me, like Sammy, for example, who just was chatting to us. Sam is a yoga teacher. Who've had the same experience as me, and I can maybe just pass on some of what I've learned, and then they can go out and share it with others, because I think long COVID is going to be a massive problem, and most yoga teachers, even if they're not specializing this, we're going to see this in our classes. So we need to have some idea of how we can help make things better and not make things worse, because we could, of course, make things worse if we are teaching in the wrong way. That's also possible.
Yeah, and actually going back to something that you said a while back, we'll talk about a couple of other people that have got experience of long COVID that you're going to be working with. But you mentioned something about somebody who talked about progressive, doing stuff in order to get better from, which is a common misnomer. It's a common mistake that people make, that, like, get active and that will help you get back to yourself. I'd love it if you just spoke to that just for a moment, so that people can understand what that means, the idea of what harm you can do by doing the wrong thing with people who've got chronic fatigue or long COVID.
Well, as we've already said, we live very much in a doing society where you're not really valued unless you're producing or doing or earning or, whatever it is. It's where we get our self-worth. And I think we all need to question that, because actually we are okay, like children are, just as we are. But there is this pressure from outside us all the time to be doing. And I think, what I have learned over the years is that a lot of people with ME have a history of trauma or of long-term chronic stress. And that means that the nervous system, the central nervous system, is out of balance. So people a lot of the time will be very likely to be running a chronic fight and flight pattern, for example, and they will find it harder to get into the parasympathetic, the rest, heal and digest, that slower part of the central nervous system. So the kind of work I do is very much about taking people out of fight, flight, And then we also talk about fight, flight, freeze. Freeze is another modality, which I talk about on the recorded course. I won't go into today because that's more associated with trauma. But we're kind of using tools to take us out of this sympathetic nervous system, adrenalized cortisone tone, which is so bad and damaging for the body, to bring the body right back. And I mean, if you're a yoga teacher, I can maybe say that, for many of us with chronic fatigue, we have very rejasic minds, and we want to maybe bring people, we're using a practice that's more tamasic in order to produce something which is sattvic. So in other words, we're trying to balance the system. So yoga teachers often make the mistake of thinking, well, if people are tired, I need to rev them up and they need to be doing more. But all that does is can push somebody very quickly into a relapse. So my classes are less about asana. They're more about relaxation, focusing on the breath, maybe using mantra, maybe using nyasa, hand gestures. It's about bringing other yoga tools in, not so yes, asana can be important because it helps us with posture, it helps us to move the lymph around the body, but the focus is much more on bringing the system down, because that's when the healing happens, is when we can be deeply relaxed.
Yeah.
So yoga nidras as well, and other forms of relaxation.
Yeah, and there's a big difference between resting and doing nothing with the mind going mad, or watching TV or reading a magazine, and having practices that really happen. Also being guided, that, the use of, we have such an amazing skill set with the use of voice. By using our voices, we can slow people down simply by slowing our, when we use our language in a slow way, that affects somebody else's physiology. So, and I love that you bring it very, very, not simply, but very clearly, the alignment with the yoga content to what we're doing. So it does make sense, the rejastic and the tamasic and the sattvic. It makes sense, and having that codified to some extent can really help us as teachers know where we're coming from. And also it gives the people that we're teaching something to understand as well. Okay, I can feel this happening in me. I've done this breathing practice, or I've done this connection to my heart, and this feels different. So I really love the way that you, without complicating things, bring that yoga philosophy into the practice that we do with our students. It's more than just breath work or movement or stillness.
I'm the kind of teacher, and I'm probably unusual these days, but I'm very interested in yoga philosophy and less interested in the science. So I've had to study the science, like, all of us do some of it. And I certainly had to write my last book because the whole of part one was based around science. But personally, I'm much more interested in yoga philosophy. So I'm studying the Yoga Sutras again currently with my teacher. And I've just done an advanced course on the chakras. So for example, I'll give you an example here. We talk a lot these days about embodiment. Now, embodiment's really important because particularly if we've had trauma, and I find this quite typical again of people with fatigue, people with long COVID usually are quite traumatized too. We tend to leave our body. So we go out. So we've got our head is over here and the body's here. So one of the things we are trying to do is to embody people, bring them back into the body. But I find working with Muladhara chakra, the root chakra, that's all about that. So that kind of work I find is really helpful in bringing people back into the body and embodying them. So that's kind of a way where the ancient yogis, who I think knew everything really, and that we can use that and align that with modern science. But I think we can get too much into modern science, which is very heady. I'm a great one for thinking, let's bring the ancient teachings and teach them, because there's so much wisdom there. And of course, the ancient teachings are all about prana and energy in a very different way from, I mean, science will talk maybe about the mitochondria and the cell and look at energy in a different way. But I like the way that yoga is about prana. My teacher always says that yoga is about how prana flows and whether there are blocks or not, and how we can help people to undo those knots or restrictions to the flow of prana.
Yeah, and I agree. I'm a big chakra fan myself, and it's lovely because when we do the practice and when we're teaching, we can bring in the philosophy or that, our way of understanding yoga. And then if we've got people in our classes who want to understand it from a scientific perspective, I feel, like I trained about 20 years ago, and even 20 years ago there wasn't there wasn't a lot of science to back up. We were doing it. We knew it was benefiting people, but we couldn't say, oh, if you do equivalent breath, the breathing up and down the body at the same level, the scientific research is X. But science has caught up, I find. The
other way around.
Science has caught up with what we've been practicing. So we've known about, that for it feels like forever that you lie down in a position where you feel comfortable and safe and held, and then breathe from heel to head and head to toe, and that causes equivalent breath to happen. You can guide people in that, and now we can say, and the science is this.
And a lot of people seem to want that, but because everybody wants everything to be evidence-based and proof of this and proof of that, whereas I just think we know yoga works, so that's great.
And that's why, and if you think about it, if you go back to your first experience of ME, you went to yoga and it worked. And there are starting to be a lot more testimonials from people who've experienced long COVID, who have mentioned, oh, well, there was this, and this, and then I did this, or I experienced this. And yoga is often part of that recovery pattern. And my sensation was this, and my acceptance of, and there's a lot of acceptance that needs to be, that people are going to have to do because of the length of time it takes for recovery to occur. And yoga is so powerful as a tool for acceptance. That's really lovely to hear you say that. I'd like to just go on now and ask you a little bit about the workshop that we've got happening on the 4th of September. We're raising money for Tree Sisters for. We've got 2 people who are joining you for that workshop, and I'd love to know how you met them, or a little bit more about them, and how what their stories are, if you're if they're happy, whatever they're happy to share, so that people can know a little bit, because people know you, people who've kind of heard you in the Teachers Forum, or you've written a couple of books, so a lot of people in the yoga community know of who you are. They may be slightly less familiar with the 2 people who you've got joining you for the workshop.
So the first person is Nadine Mackay. And I was introduced to her by Heather Mason of the Minded Institute, because Heather's actually asked us if we'll do a yoga therapy module on long COVID. So we're working on that for next year. But we've only met on Zoom, but we got on really, really well. And I think we've also bonded because Nadine has had long COVID and she still gets periods of fatigue. And when working together, we're really supportive of each other, and we really understand. And actually we're now planning on doing another book together, not this year but in 2023, on yoga and long COVID. But Nadine is a breathing expert, so she works together with a physiotherapist. She's a yoga therapist, but she's working a lot with people with long COVID, particularly around the breath. And I mean, of course, yoga should always be about the breath, but she has some very interesting things to share. And I'll just kind of, give away one of them, is that people with long COVID often can't do anything other than learn to focus on the difference between the inhalation and the exhalation, and anything more can be too much for them. So, we do meet people with long COVID often very traumatized and very out of touch with the breath. So it has to be very, very simple. So I'm really excited to work with Nadine because she's such a lovely person. And, like all of us, she's had this very unique experience, so she wants to share it. And then Frances Goodall, who I've known a few years now, she's brilliant. She is from the Women's Wellness Circle, which I think you know, Julia, too. So she heads up the Women's Wellness Circle together with, I haven't met her business partner, I think she's called Moon. But before that, she was working with Sophie, who you knew. Yeah. And they have about 5,000 members. And I sometimes do free yoga sessions for them. And I just know Frances through the circuit, really, because we both have had a history of having ME. Frances had ME and then recovered. She now does a lot of emotional freedom technique or tapping work. And she just runs great events for the Women's Wellness Circle. Originally, I was only going to interview Nadine, and then Frances popped up on Instagram, and she's had COVID and she's made a full recovery, and she's now offering people a free protocol, which I, very generous. She is a very generous person. And I thought, oh, that would be, I'd really like to talk to her about this. And one question, without wanting to give away too much, because I don't know what her, I suspect what her response will be, but I want to know, if you've had ME, can that help you if you have COVID? Can that help prevent long COVID? Because you know about convalescence, because the big C, convalescence word, is so important, and it's something I think we've completely forgotten. So when doctors are talking about long COVID, they're talking about vaccinations or medication or, this, that, and the other. And what people are wanting to do is to go straight back into their stressful lives. And if you think 20, 30 years ago, if we had a particularly virulent virus like glandular fever, we would have been told to bed rest for 6 weeks and then maybe to not work for 6 months. But our society's completely forgotten this convalescence thing. So that's one of the questions I'm going to be debating with the two of them. So I'm sure they both got a lot to offer, a lot that we can all learn from, a lot that I can learn from. And then I will be giving a practice after the interview.
Yeah, I love what you've said about that, because often as yoga teachers, people can feel that they have a responsibility to have an answer to every question. And often those questions are medical. They're to do with, having experienced a medical condition, or going, I teach the perimenopause training. It's like going through a lifetime change that can cause physical changes that there are medical options for. And that isn't our role. Our role is to share yoga in order to help people who have various experiences, and potentially to signpost them if they want other things. But the value of the yoga philosophy, the breath work, the movement, the stillness is immense. And it gives agency to people. So rather than, especially, with long COVID, there are people who are searching everywhere for the medical answer to long COVID. And there isn't necessarily a medical answer to long COVID, and there wasn't for ME. So knowing that there's something there that has, certainly a proven track record for ME, and, and for people experiencing perimenopause symptoms, that gives people agency to own their own experience, is huge. It's really huge.
Yes, I completely agree. It is about self-agency. Yoga is all about what I can do for myself, rather than me giving my power away to somebody else to give me a magic bullet to fix it. And I think for me, that was, when I had ME, that was one of my most important lessons, because I spent the first 6 years expecting a doctor to give me a tablet and being angry that there wasn't. And then gradually realizing that the responsibility lay with me. And, to this day, that's maybe the most valuable lesson I've learned in my life, is that I have my own agency. And that's what I try to share with my students.
Yeah.
And like you say, I mean, I take referrals, or Leeds Hospital refer people with long COVID to my yoga classes. And one of their physios wrote to me, very nice email, but she was saying, we're working with like rest and high activity. And when I read that, I was like, no, we shouldn't. If you've got long COVID, if you've got a post-viral condition, particularly in the first stages, you should not be, there's no room for high activity. And what I do find, there's this kind of conflict of the messages our society is giving us, which is do, go, 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 strive, push, achieve. And then if you're ill, it's very difficult because you habitually want to get back into that, and all your dopamine and other messages are telling you want to get back into that fast stream of life. But actually, illness is a wonderful opportunity. I know it doesn't feel like it at the time, but it can be a wonderful opportunity to stop, slow down, and then, you know, yoga can help to support us in this. And then it might even become, you know, with the resting and the breathing and the other techniques, that we start to see that maybe there's even a spiritual message in this, that the conventional medicine, which is much more about suppressing symptoms, would never give us.
Yeah, you know, I love what you said about suppressing symptoms. It's like there's a very big difference between having a headache and taking a paracetamol, and having a headache and noticing you have a headache and seeing how it feels in your body. I mean, that's a very simple analogy. There was a really useful document that we've got. If you go into the Facebook group for Yoga Teachers Forum, it's shared in the documents section in the Facebook group. And in it, one of your fellow teachers talked about walking as opposed to yoga practice. And would you be happy to talk to that? Because I thought it was a really, really valid point, because people think that walking is really gentle, but actually there are other practices that you could do before walking that would help you be able to, you know, do something which seems as really simple, you know, oh, walking's fine, but actually.
Yeah, I think that was Susie Bolt, who's a really great teacher. She's got quite a big long COVID group on Facebook, and she's working with, I think it's Oxford University, so she's doing some brilliant work with long COVID. She's a yoga teacher who's had long COVID herself. So I can't remember exactly what she said, but the document Julia's talking about was set up by the British Association of Yoga Therapists, and I was one of the members on that. So it was like a advisory document available for all yoga teachers on how we teach for long COVID. And Susie was talking about how that, you know, walking might be too much, and it might just be very gentle movement and stretching at the beginning. And that, you know, when we've had a very virulent virus, going out to walk, because the pacing is so important. I mean, I had a student recently, she's actually in New York. She was doing really well after 9 months of long COVID. She went out on a 6-mile walk and she crashed, you know, and that's kind of the message again, that we have to pace. And inch by inch, we will get there. We have to do it slowly, and we're not used to, in our world, doing things slowly. But it's like the tortoise and the hare, and the tortoise will get there.
Yeah, I'd love to ask you as well, because you run the 4-week training, and we've run it a couple of times. We've run it as a kind of a live course, and then we've run it really successfully as an online training, because all the sessions were recorded, and we were really kind of careful about making sure that they'd be the kind of thing that people could watch in their own time. And also, I know both of us felt quite passionately that, in fact, right at the very beginning, when we talked about putting the course together, we said we wanted it to be chronic fatigue and long COVID friendly. And what that means is giving people the opportunity to take it in little doses and take as long as they like to receive it and assimilate it, because there's so much out there that is, you've got, even in the yoga world, attend this conference over a long weekend with 450 speakers.
Yeah,
and we want
to be overwhelmed.
Exactly, and we wanted to do something that was chronic fatigue and long COVID friendly. And I'd love you maybe to talk a little bit about the 4-week course that's going to start in November, and about, you know, how we came to do it in that way. So, and, you know, and how we've kind of arranged the content so that it's really well paced and, you know, works for people who also are having experiences of overwhelm themselves.
Well, I was discussing the course. I wasn't actually intending to run a course, but I think I spoke to you in February because we had been talking about burnout you've been helping contribute to my book. And you were like, yeah, come and do a course, come and do a course. And at the time I felt something was needed for teachers who would be facing people with long COVID. But of course, we weren't knowing so much about long COVID at that point. But because of what I knew about ME, I just thought we needed to get the information out there. So Julia kind of pushed me to do the course. And I was really lucky because I thought, that's too much, that my wonderful friend, teacher and mentor, Sarah Ryan, came on and did it with me. And she's just brilliant. I, cannot say enough about Sarah Ryan's teaching. So when we did the course, it's only over 4 weeks, although there's additional reading if you want, additional material. But I think what Sarah and I did was try to not make it too heady, because there, as Julia says, there's a lot of courses where it's, very much overwhelmed. So there's a bit of chat and then there's a breathing practice. There's a bit of chat, then there's a practice. There's quite a lot of practice based in it as well. Does that answer your question?
Yeah.
I'm just wondering if I could ask Sammy again, and I haven't arranged this at all. Sammy did the course. What did you think, Sammy? Can you endorse it for us?
Yeah, it's brilliant. There was so much, because there was both of you as well. There was so much to learn, so much different stuff. That makes sense.
Thank you. I didn't pay her to say that, everybody. I didn't know I was going to ask her. So thank you, Sammy.
Oh, well.
Yeah. Julie, do you want to ask if people have got questions at this point, or have you got?
We've only got about 10 minutes left with Fiona. So if you have got any questions for Fiona about anything to do with chronic fatigue, burnout, long COVID, her experience, her classes, anything about that, then please do. If you want to unmute yourself, then you'll be live on Facebook and you'll be in the recording, but you can also pop it in the chat. Now is your opportunity to do that. So, any burning questions, then you can do that. Here you go. There's people who are saying that they're hoping to come along to the next workshop, which is very lovely to hear. But if you have any particular questions, then do let us know.
And I just say goodbye to Sarah, thank you, Sarah. She's enjoyed the course and she's got to do the next workshop. Thanks, Sarah.
Yeah. So while is someone unmuting them? I can see people unmuting themselves to ask a question. So I think while we're waiting for a question, I'm going to ask you, what is your favorite thing about making the choice to work with people who have chronic fatigue and non-COVID? What do you love most about the classes that you share?
Well, ironically, and this might not be the answer you're expecting, but I enjoy working on Zoom. And the reason for that is Zoom has made it so accessible for people with ME. Because before I was running retreats, and it never occurred to me that some people were just not well enough to come on retreats. Because I now work on Zoom, I have people who might be housebound, some people work on their beds or on sofas, or they're in different countries. So I enjoy the accessibility. And yeah, I think, and because of that accessibility, I've now learned to make the classes even more gentle than when I was teaching on retreats. So I'm learning from my students all the time. So I do enjoy the flexibility of Zoom. To be in real life would be lovely. And actually, I'm running a retreat at the beginning of in Spain at the beginning of October, but because of COVID, we don't know if people will be able to come to that or not.
Yeah, it's interesting what you say about Zoom, because there's not only an accessibility angle to Zoom, but there's also an affordability angle. Yeah. So with the teacher trainings, people can't always afford to go on a retreat, or and also there's a timing issue for people as well. There's a time it takes to get somewhere and to get home again. And often people have other commitments, they've got people that they're responsible for as well. So it is really wonderful to know that there is an option.
Yeah, I mean, it's also, sorry, I mean,
go. You
I was going to say that for some people, particularly with fatigue, it can be very tiring to get to a class. And for some people, that might be all they can do in any one week. And I make my classes, I try to make them accessible for everybody, so they're on donation. And if people can't afford to pay, that's fine too. And because on Zoom you can have more people and you're not paying for a venue, I can do that. Whereas if I was hiring a hall somewhere, I might not be able to make that possible. So, I do have a few people who can't afford to pay anything. A lot of people are on benefits. So it's just whatever people can pay, they pay.
Yeah, that's lovely. So we haven't had any questions come through. Oh, we have. Wait a second. Just to say how brilliant Fiona's book is. It's very well explained, and love how the philosophy is weaved into it. One of my favorite yoga books.
Oh, thank you. I didn't pay her to say this. Thank you. That's so kind of you.
And it's also and it's also somebody who's says it's very useful, and they're ill with COVID at the moment.
Oh, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry you're not well. Please take lots and lots of rest, because that's my message. And I hope if you come on the long COVID workshop, you'll learn more from both Francis and Nadine, but just rest, and I'm sure you'll get there. And also I must just give a shout out to my dear friend Leah Barnett, because she was a contributing editor on the book and she did help me. She had some great ideas, so she also wrote bits of it. So I'd just like to give a shout out for her too. But thank you for your kindness. I'm so glad you like the book.
Oh, that's really lovely. That's a nice note to be kind of rounding things up with. So to let everybody know, the Yoga for Long COVID workshop is taking place on the 24th of September. That's on Zoom, and it's 10:30 till 12:30 BST, that's UK time. It will also be recorded. So those of you who for whom 2 hours is too long to be focusing for, or if you're not available at that time, or if it's the wrong time zone for you, then it'll be recorded and that's sent out to you after the event has taken place. This particular workshop, 75% of the profits of the workshop are going to the charity.
Someone at the door, I will be coming back.
Okay, so I will spin myself for this. So that workshop, 75% of the profit of that workshop is going to the charity Tree Sisters. I'm going to try and get Tree Sisters to write a little article for us for the e-magazine for Yoga Teachers Forum, so you can find out a little bit more about them. And then Fiona's longer training, which is also recorded, it's there for you to go back to as many times as you like, but that's starting on the 1st of November, because what that means is that Fiona's there for the 4-week course as you're watching the training, so that any questions that come up, and we've had really beautiful dialogues, you can see the questions that other people write, you can see Fiona's responses to all of those questions as well. That starts on the 1st of November. Fiona just talked about the fact that people who have chronic conditions over a long period of time can be affected financially. And this and all the trainings that we run at Yoga Teachers Forum, we have financial hardship discounts for people. If you contact info@yogateachersforum.org, or if you contact Fiona directly as well, a lot of people are in personal contact with Fiona. Do let her know, or let me know, if that's something that you're experiencing, because we have a commitment to ensuring that people can attend our training. That's the important thing is to get the information out there. I'm just going to re-spotlight Fiona. Hi, Fiona. So have you got any final words for us before we say goodbye?
I'd just like to thank you all very much for being here. It's lovely to meet you, and thank you for your lovely comments. And I hope to see you sometime, maybe in one of the trainings on the long COVID workshop or the 4-week course, or wherever in the future. And also, if I can just say, if you want more information, there's a lot more information in my book too. But do feel free to email me. My website is my name. So if you Google that, my website will come up. And I'd also like to say a huge thank you to Julia for facilitating this and for the amazing work that she is doing on for Yoga Teachers Forum.
Oh, thank you so much, Fiona. It's been a real pleasure. I knew it would be. I was really excited about speaking to you this morning.
Thank you for facilitating this.
And thank you for joining us. It's really lovely to feel that we're speaking to people and sharing. So thank you, Sammy, for participating as well. And hopefully we'll look forward to seeing many of you towards the end of this month and in November. I'm going to sign off the recording. Oh, we're going to just stop the recording now.